Hello. How's everyone doing? Am I
Hi,
working?
everyone.
Hey, Thomas. Hey, Robert. Hey, Raphael.
Hello.
How are you all doing?
All good.
All right. Here's the notes for today. Yeah, I guess so I put a couple items in the agenda. Does anybody else want to add? Does anybody want to start, or specific items they want to add or discuss? Okay, I'll jump in if you think of anything. You go at the end. So the update first, what's going on? I'm working on the platform's definition paper. We had a couple meetings the past couple weeks. Thank you, Thomas and Raffaele and other folks that have joined. Really good feedback. I think we're getting to at least the structure, a kind of consensus. And I posted in the issue here kind of what we could do next. So I'm just updating you all. Like I haven't had a chance to do it yet. I haven't even had a chance to handle the feedback from our last session. But what I'm kind of thinking next is based on those sections, create a directory with a markdown file for each section, some sort of automation that merges them all and publishes a markdown file, a PDF. There's a couple other papers like that around, so I need to look. If anybody else wants to help, feel free. I'm just kind of looking at the way they did those and the others, and kind of learn from that. I figured it'll be one PR to kind of put the framework in, and then I'll make PRs for the sections, and that way we can kind of debate before they land. But I'll start largely with the stuff that we've iterated on in the Google Doc. So I guess that's one update from me. Yeah, if we want also, like, if you all want now, we can keep going over that paper, or we can get feedback in this session here now. I'm open to that. The other thing that I put in the agenda is what goes next. Kind of what I was inspired in the last Tag App Delivery meeting on Wednesday. I was talking with Alois a tiny bit, and he said, in terms of getting feedback, like one of the things I'm thinking with this paper is not necessarily that it's the be all and end all, but that it puts a stake in the ground, and then people can say, we agree, we don't agree, this is this aspect, this is not. So that's why I wanted to get it, something out there. But then I do talk to, and Alois was emphasizing projects. Like we should work with the projects to know, where their take is on all this stuff, where they fit in, what kind of feedback they need from their users. And I thought that rang kind of true. Like I shouldn't just use my Red Hat customers or something. Like I'm kind of representing CNCF here and trying to, PM their projects, PM the, make sure they have the feedback they need. So I thought that made sense. So I just wanted to share that. Like a next step here might be working with the projects that are related to platforms, are related to Tag App Delivery, and interviewing their customers, or even just finding people on GitHub to talk to, things like that.
I like that idea. I think it's a very good point.
Cool.
Yeah, I also like the idea. Very good to gather some feedback like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'll I'm gonna work on that. I just put it up there right now. I'm just trying to get that initial paper in. Yeah, in fact, I guess I can say in this
Probably
public,
create like a list, right? A list of projects that we want to interview. If they want to share their customers, we could also interview their customers. Yeah, and they don't need necessarily have to be just CNCF projects, right?
Yeah, I agree. I originally wrote in this note open source, I mean CNCF, but yeah, I guess it's not.
Is it for projects or also for organizations that internally are building a platform and then they can share their feedback?
mean, that's definitely what we want, but I guess the context could be these projects that ultimately we're supporting. So I liked how I like the suggestion because it like kind of grounds us, make sure that it comes back to one of our projects, an open source project.
Yeah, we definitely run a risk of being too much biased by our own experience. Talking to customers, I always find surprising what was the vector that brought them to start building the platform, right? Like, I think the last one, they just wanted better documentation for their microservices. That was the initial starting point. Like, I don't even know if we mentioned, I think we mentioned documentation at some point, but it's unusual. So hearing more of these stories, I think it's very useful to us. Otherwise, we might run a little bit of ivory tower risk here.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned as we've worked on this the past couple of months is what you were just saying, kind of, Rafael. Like, it's the interfaces, the documentation, the code templates that are really the first landing point for folks, making that experience better. So yeah. Okay, so that's all. I mean, I don't have any other agenda items for today. I just was going to get a progress report. If we want to work through the doc, I guess, I mean, I can open it up. Does anybody want to talk about something specific there?
There's a lot of stuff that has happened since the last time I checked it out. So I'm just trying to read through and see if I see anything.
Yeah, check out the notes also from the past couple ad hoc meetings. Put some of the stuff in there. There's a lot of
yeah, I think it's starting to look really good. There's a lot of information here. Yeah, there's nothing that like I'm just like looking and see that like there's more to add or stuff like that. It seems like there's some notes to or comments to go through.
Yeah, if you have a chance, Robert, it would really, if you can go through those, would appreciate your feedback.
I can do that. I can do that later on. I have a thing in not that long I need to attend to, but yeah, I'll put that on my to-do right now.
I have a question for the team. Like, if we are done with the document, but yeah, last time there was a lady here in the team that brought up something, and I would like to bring it up again and see what everybody thinks in their own day job about that. But I think we're all coming to this platform idea with the perspective that it's going to be based on GitOps, right? So very declarative, and then to get essentially your interaction with the platform is to make PRs, and then from there the GitOps automation takes over. But what she said was not everything can be made declarative. There are things that are imperative in nature and very hard to portray, to bring to be very declarative, right? I think she works for Kratix or something like that, right? And they have a solution for that. But in general, what is our answer to that, right? Because I think she's right. There are things that are hard to. There are things that, for example, need to happen once, right? And then once they're up and once they have up, happened, maybe they should not happen again. And there is no really good way to do reconciling. So do we want to have a thought on in that space? And you know, there are approaches to solving this problem, but it's still very like you can do sync waves in some cases and spin up a job, or I think Crossplane has its own thing to do this kind of things, but still it's very brittle, right? So I'm curious to see what other people are doing for this problem, and if there is something we should mention in the document.
I don't see it as a GitOps or nothing type mentality here. What I think is important when we're doing stuff like this is to keep everything as open as possible. There are certain things, or as general as possible. You know, there's the interaction part of this, which could be through Git if you're doing a GitOps model scenario, or it could be an API, or it could be a different type of tooling on top of that. But I don't think any of us wants to write something that has GitOps as kind of like the golden standard of doing anything, just because, you know, we can't really have that. There are definitely, you know, scenarios where there are things that just need to happen once. And from the perspective that the platform that I'm building, like everything is through GitOps mostly, unless there's a team that has something that just needs to happen once and do something. And at that point, as long as they can have it in a container, we can have it in the same platform and make an endpoint for it and so on. So and that's just as viable as doing GitOps for everything. Not everything needs to be declared in a state, if that makes sense. I'm just a little bit curious about text. I don't see anything that specifically says that. I think the idea is that, for instance, like the wording like task runners and reconcilers, it could be either or.
Right. That was kind of the point of that one.
Yeah. So I think like this text in itself is pretty open for interpretation when it comes to if you want to do something more declarative, like declaring a state, and this is how it's supposed to look, and then have a GitOps process where it's like fetching that and making sure that happens, or if there's like a single fire task that needs to be done. And there's so many ways to implement that yeah. But was that the feedback that was from someone about this paper, or was it just like a general platform perspective question?
Well, Abby, so Kratix, one of the ways which she says it differentiates from Crossplane, is that Crossplane doesn't really leave itself open to any imperative action, whereas I believe Kratix can run a Tekton step or pipeline as part of its work. And yeah, so she thinks, like Raphael was saying, that there are situations where that's needed and Crossplane isn't quite enough.
Yeah. Well, you, depending on what you're going to do, you're always going to have some sort of mix of tooling. We don't use Crossplane, for instance, for infrastructure stuff, but we are using Flux for the GitOps part. And if we wanted to have something like Tekton, we could have done that through a manifest and just put it into Git, and that part would reconcile to a certain extent. But like I said, there's some of these things are not going to be declared in a state. It's going to be a single fire based on some sort of API gateway.
What you just said, Robert, kind of like, but you said that even the imperative or one-off stuff, you would check in. Did I kind of catch that right? You would have that codified in a repo. Maybe that's what is the key.
Maybe, but for me, it's like if you have some sort of tooling that stands up something that does an imperative thing, just for lack of a better word, that would still probably be a Kubernetes manifest. And if it's a Kubernetes manifest, I would put it into Git and use Flux to reconcile it. You know, the thing that it doesn't stand up might be not controlled by the GitOps model. But the delivery of that resource for me would just as easily be done through GitOps than anything else. For me, it's more of the, if we're, so we have teams that are doing things in different ways. Some might use PowerShell for their stuff, or Python or whatever. And what we just keep on saying is, if you can put it into container, and if that container can run and then do its thing and quit, we can put that on the platform and give it an endpoint to spin up based on inputs. Like, it doesn't have to be in Git necessarily.
It doesn't have to be in Git. That's interesting. So that's what I was getting at. Like, could it be imperative, but you gotta have it, you gotta have your Python script also checked in. Like, there's no such thing as, you know, maintaining your own dot files or something.
Yes, well, you know, so if you set this up the way that it works for us, at least, like you need at that point build into a container, and if you're going to do that, you probably want it to Git, but that doesn't mean it actually has any impact on the platform itself. That's just an artifact that it consumes. So however that happens, you know, we don't really care. However, what we would do is there will be something deployed through Git, an application, an API gateway that has an endpoint that at some point just spins up that container as a one-time thing in Kubernetes, basically. So at that point, it's a static one-time thing that happens. It's not declared anywhere that this is supposed to run or is supposed to be reconciled at all. But everything around it, yes. So
You know what I'm kind of thinking? Like, can you reify the state of the application from its Git repos at any point? Maybe that's what is the key, not declarative versus imperative. It's that this repo, you know, captures, if you run it in the right way, exactly the state that's expected.
maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is really the point, right? In theory, if I lose the cluster, but I don't necessarily lose the state.
Yeah.
Do I have a way to know if I have to rerun that once only thing? I mean, that's really the hard part here. And when I try, you know, when I try to model these things with jobs, they don't work very well, to be honest.
You have to wrap in like checks.
Uh,
I mean, you could wrap a job in checks, right? Like, is this state? Well, if not, then I'll do it.
Yeah, you could, and you would be, yes. It starts to look like an operator at that point, but sure.
but that's the kind of thing. Like for me, and this is going to become very about a specific tool that we're using, but we are using the TF controller to automate Terraform.
Oh, yeah.
And we define a Terraform resource.
Our Terraform guru.
And if that Terraform resource, you know, it has a certain, like, you can set a, you know, 1 minute to whatever for every time it needs to reconcile, or just go over and check, you know, if everything is as it should be. But what TF controller does, it doesn't, like, in the controller itself, it doesn't actually run Terraform. It spins up a TF runner that runs Terraform on that particular instance. And as soon as that's done, it's deleted and it's gone. And the reason why it can do that, and that makes sense in that case, is because the Terraform state is stored elsewhere. So the runner itself doesn't care. Like you say, point it towards a state file, checks, make sure, oh, you know, something has happened. We need to, you know, run Terraform again. It's a new runner that actually comes up and does everything over again. So the instance of running Terraform doesn't really have any. There's no state. It's not declared in that sense, but it's something else that is making that happen. So you could do it like that. Have something that is declaratively stated that takes any type of like external outputs and then do something with that. So like the application or you know, the thing that you're supposed to run is actually declaratively added to the system state, but then it's triggered based on other things. And if it's not stateless, then obviously that state needs to be stored somewhere, which you know, I would prefer not to have it in the Kubernetes cluster, because at that point I could just nuke the entire cluster and set it up again and point it towards Git, and everything would come up again.
Right. Okay, so as long, basically, okay, I get how Terraform works. So as long as you have the TF state, and in some cases you can even rebuild it, even if you lose it, right? I think if you write very good Terraform, you could even rebuild it. But okay, I get it. So could you do, with that approach, could you do things like create a database schema, upgrade a database schema, populate it maybe with some users and roles and maybe some initial data? Are all those things you could do with that approach, do you think?
Well, if you're using Terraform, yes, everything will be stored in that Terraform state. So it will never, as long as you keep that safe, you will never lose what happened. Again, this is just like abstraction layers on, like if you are writing Terraform on your machine and you have several people working on the same set of Terraform configuration, and the state is somewhere shared, that this is exactly the same approach. It just happens to be automated through Kubernetes. So when someone is running Terraform on that state file, it just locks the state, you know, checks it against et cetera, and then if everything's okay, then everything's okay. Hey, Abby.
Hey, Abby. And we're just talking about this, but I just wanted to share something real quick. The one thing we could look at this as is, you know, there's a couple different categories for automation. This has been, so we could write an article, a paper, you know, it could be in CNCF, it could be Rafa, you write something on your blog that builds on, okay, we've talked about automation. What are the 3 patterns for automation? You know, declarative, GitOps style, imperative, and then Terraform, because it's got the TF state, is almost like a quasi somewhere in between.
Well, Terraform is actually declarative. It just happens to store the state somewhere that you can reference. Yeah. So it is somewhere where you say, I want this type of resource, and you don't really care about how that happens. So in that sense, declarative, but it's, you know, unlike many other tools, it actually puts it into some sort of like a data file, and then you can reference that, which is why
debate over that all the time. It's definitely, I agree, it's definitely declarative, but the big thing doesn't do the drift detection, which is what GitOps does, right? It's
Terraform does also the drift detection by nature.
If you run more plans, right? And yes. So it's not built into the workflows. You have to kind of create your own workflows around it usually. Versus GitOps, it's like it is perpetually trying to rectify any drift. Versus with Terraform, you have to kind of build your own workflows if you want that to happen.
Yes, but the way that I see it, at least, the tooling itself doesn't do that unless you actually do something. But both HashiCorp and many others have tooling that runs Terraform and then do drift detection for you by doing that. And also, just since you weren't there when I said it, my use case is that I'm using TF Controller from Weaveworks, which then does drift detection based on that. So it's the nature of the application, but Terraform is a tool, a simple tool, you know. So you would have to do something with that tool to have drift detection automatically.
Nice.
Abby, you missed the start of the
Yeah, sorry about that.
discussion, but Rafa actually was referring to your comment last week that Kratix includes some imperative commands, and we were discussing where imperative versus declarative fits and GitOps and whether we should get into that in this paper. Yeah, I kind of lean to say let's. Well, what would we say? Would we say declarative? You know, what if this was at all mentioned here? Or should we just leave it?
Isn't that implementation detail, at least within the platform? Because I guess there's also a lot of imperative stuff, even Flux and Argo CD, because we need imperative and task runners. We have the sync waves or the dependencies and any kind of tricks to do imperative stuff in a declarative world. So it might open up a very wide discussion. I think perhaps the focus of the document should be more of the external API, like the user APIs, that is declarative. Like I declare I want my development environment and I don't care how it's created. And then how things work internally, if it's GitOps, if it's through pull request, direct merge, or via containers, then perhaps could be a different document where we analyze different patterns or implementation strategies. What do you think about that?
I support that idea of putting it. For me, the reason why it's a platform is not because of the tooling that it combines, but the way that it gives the users the capabilities to do things. And I think that part should be declarative. I don't want anyone that are using my platform to have to know how to get stuff to work. I want them to be able to just go and say, give me an environment. It should look like this. Like what happens in the back there, you know, there's none of them. They're you know, that's an abstraction layer down. That's what I do. They don't have to think about that. So for me, it's like I think that is the main thing that people need to think about when they're doing creating platforms and doing platform engineering. It's the actual interaction with the platform and to make that as easily accessible as possible. So yes,
I hear you. What I'm kind of like thinking about as you all are talking is it's almost like the imperative declarative thing is indicative. It's correlated. It signals that we've separated the hard part from the end developer. Like they just have to write a config in a repo declarative. If we've done our work right as platform engineers or the capability providers, then the imperative part is in the operator or the controller or something and hidden away.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about declarative versus imperative, but that's a good signal that you've written things in the right way. If somebody can, you know, just declare a YAML file and your imperative stuff will work it.
Yeah, it's for me is like you know, at this point, as a person who can drive a car, shouldn't be able, like, I wouldn't do I need to know how a car works? Like, or even further down, do I need to sit there and move pistons up and down to make sure the car goes forward? No, I should just be able to sit down and push a pedal and everything works. For me, it's kind of the same thing. The people that I usually work against, which is developers, that's kind of the target audience for the things that I do. Many of them know a lot about like the you know, how to run things and like infrastructure and so on and so forth. But it's just that the cognitive overload of having to think about everything. They just want to say, this is my code. How do I get it onto the platform? All right, this is the approach. Cool, done. And then it's up to me to make sure that that actually is working as intended and that they have an easy time using that platform. So for me, that is key to what a platform is. Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with the Kelsey Hightower quote. Because again, we're talking about certain abstraction levels. You know, the things that I do is on top of abstraction layers, on top of abstraction layers, and so on and so forth. And in the end, it's just binary. but I don't have to deal with that.
This is what creates separation between defining a resource and managing it.
I would agree.
Yeah. It's a nice quote. Let's figure out how to-
That's the reason everyone quotes Kelsey Hightower, I guess.
Okay, so I think we're good on that. Like I could see follow on talking about the different patterns of automation. Maybe we even ask the GitOps working group if they wanted to dive into this a little further. That's come up in some of the Slack threads. Like GitOps is, it's impossible to always be declarative. Some people come in and are like, I'm not, how do you do GitOps? I can't do it correctly. I've seen people post in the Slack channel that way. So might be something to pursue.
I got quoted on Mastodon for an article about GitOps, and there's a person who commented and was very much like, I don't understand why GitOps is a thing. This is just CI/CD, and it's like, but I try linking to the principles, but it kind of continues. Well, that's just CI. I'm like, okay, this needs a whole lot more talking. Then I'm capable of
Well,
doing comments.
I mean, GitOps is kind of a pattern for delivery. I don't, it seems like.
Well, that is what I usually say is GitOps is a continuous deployment, not delivery. Continuous deployment scenario. You don't want to care about deployment. You want to just say, I want this stuff to be deployed, and the deployment itself, you shouldn't have to care about. That should happen automatically. Continuous integration, that's one thing. Continuous delivery, having software that's ready to be delivered, that's another thing. Continuous deployment shouldn't be a thing. You should just be able to say, this is what I want out, and then that happens.
Okay.
So
defining deployment in a certain way and delivery.
yes. So for me, that is like the key to GitOps, right? Simplifying deployment, not necessarily integration or delivery, but deployment. And in the same way, it's like we could bring some of this discussion into the GitOps working group, or Open GitOps, however you want to name us. But the idea itself is like, for me, it's GitOps is an operational model that you can use for your platform. It is also a method to deploy, for instance, applications, if that is the interaction towards the platform. So if you, for instance, say to someone, put your manifest in here and everything else would solve itself, that is perfectly fine. But that is not like a be-all, end-all way of defining a platform. Which is why I keep on saying like the interaction element. What I usually say is interaction, compute, and data integration. Like those three things just have to talk to with each other. If the interaction towards the platform is GitOps, and you have developers that are capable of doing that, creating those manifests and putting it together, that's perfectly fine. But some don't. And at that point, you need to abstract that to something else, potential API, with potentially the UI, with potentially, et cetera, et cetera.
That comes in strong. Yeah, the UI aspect. I hear that. Like some people may interact directly with the UI and not want YAML. Yeah.
But it seems to me that the GitOps layer is more and more getting established, and that's what I was saying before. It seems to me that in some sense, we're all converging toward we're gonna have a GitOps interface between the users and the platform and what's happening inside the platform. Then that interface may not be good enough. We need maybe something on top of it, because not everybody can write configuration files and PRs. So maybe we need a tool on top of it that makes it simple, like point and click. But yeah, it seems to me that the GitOps layer is more and more accepted as a standard of separation, like in the Kelsey quote.
Yeah, I try not to say anything that concrete because I'm obviously biased as someone that is a maintainer of the Open GitOps project, and very vocal about basically everything GitOps. At the same time, it's what we try to do, for instance, is we're building services that are built on top of GitOps. We're not like hiding that. We're saying it straight out. This is how we do stuff. At some point, there's going to be an application platform for a developer to use. We would prefer if you did stuff through GitOps because that is what we believe in. But at the same time, there's all these different scenarios. So, there's different people. We can't say this is the one approach to do it all. So we need to be open for us putting up, in our instance, a Kubernetes cluster, which uses Flux to do all the system parts of it. And then the users might potentially just use CI/CD tools or even kubectl applied, like whatever. Like we can't just deny people doing that because that is a specific team decision to do. Like how does our workflow look like? So even though our workflow is very much GitOps through and through, like even the stuff that comes in through APIs that are just like defined once doesn't actually go into the API, it goes into Git. Like, because we want it there, we want that to be our current or desired state. That doesn't mean we can just like say this is the one approach to do it, even as a very open GitOps advocate.
And do they realize the kind of guarantees they give up by, let's say, doing an apply directly?
Yeah, in many cases, yes, and in many cases, the people are afraid of just leaving this to automation for some reason, thinking that a CI/CD situation is better because of a number of reasons. Like I said, for me, the entire part of GitOps is not to have to think about deployment. Like you should do everything up until a point, and as soon as you have something that can be deliverable, which is the CI/CD part, like traditional stuff, the continuous deployment part should just be this is the new version, and then pull it in. So you should have solved everything before that, but it is a tough sell if you're talking to someone with a lot of years experience that aren't really open to new ideas. That's just the reality. So even though I would like to say, yes, GitOps is going to solve the entire platform scenario, even I can't really say that.
I think that flexibility is important, like compared to like platform like Heroku, for example, where that's the way that it works. You don't have the flexibility to change too many things. Instead, what we're talking about here is you have full flexibility and capabilities. Then, of course, there are recommended way from the platform team. This is what we recommend to do. But having that chance, that possibility to do something different, I think it's quite critical to the success of the platform.
Yeah. And that's actually a thing that we've been discussing. Like we want to be kind of like Heroku for platforms, but without the like limited factor. Like if you don't want to think about anything, we could just like deploy everything that you need. And then you just go ahead and do whatever. But we are also open to swapping out tools, swapping out, delivery methods, whatever.
When you say that, is that essentially like your golden path then? Your Heroku is saying, if you want to use your golden path, it's ready for you. Just go. Like here are your parameters you have to meet and everything else is done for you, but you can deviate from the golden path in these ways, right? You can. Yeah. Cool.
That's interesting. I was also thinking that, like, I just was thinking the golden paths probably end up being GitOps if they result in code templates and code, samples.
Yeah, for us that would be it. So if we had someone that wants to do things the way that we want it to be, At some point, you're just going to end up having a Git repository, and you put your manifest there, and that's it. That's how you interact with the platform. But obviously, like I said, like for the deployment part, we need to be flexible. Even for like monitoring and everything that's part of like this kind of like solution, even there we need to be flexible. We have a starting point, but obviously we need to start off in the way that we want to do it, but be open that we have to change out every single part of the entire platform at some point to, because we're trying to do this at scale. We're not trying to do this for an internal team. We don't have, like, our internal customers aren't internal customers. It's the world, if that makes sense. So like we just have to make sure that whatever we do, we don't paint ourselves into a corner where it's like, oh, you need to use this tool to make this work, which just makes it hard for us though. But
One last thing is I pasted in there, the KPT folks, that's a CAP, they call it, Brian Grant and stuff from Google had they shared this in some of the CNCF channels like 6 or 9 months ago. Basically if I understand CAP correctly, it's allows you to make edits to like configuration files even after they've been checked in, and it somehow can push them back into Git also. So like it's not just a one-way path. That's what they're, they kind of want to create a UI over the configuration. So you could do, yeah, it's almost like what we're saying. You could use a UI to configure your configs, and that would lend itself to Rafa's, idea that the only interface is declarative YAML. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. Maybe it triggers some ideas for you all.
I'm going to read through
merge conflicting.
Yeah,
The few tools I've used that allow you to change both, change things from so many different directions have always created joy when it comes to local diffs on like your local repositories.
If I put my GitOps hat on, for me, this all of a sudden doesn't become GitOps anymore.
Well, I think what they're saying is they store your configuration in a world that then is read from your GitOps operator to that is its declared state. But
so at that point they're actually breaking GitOps.
Yeah.
But
Brian Grant, he's not afraid. He wrote customized too.
But it's one of those things like you can do that. Like that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. That's actually what I was thinking of it here. Like maybe this isn't GitOps the way the GitOps Ouija defines it, but we shouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, but it is one of those things where the like rationale behind GitOps is kind of defined into the principles, and if you are following that, as soon as the desired state is not actually coming from the storage space, whatever that is, if it's Git or anywhere else that's immutable and versioned, if it doesn't come from there, it actually is not GitOps. So as soon as you start having that kind of like interaction between the platform, you're not doing GitOps, then you're just putting stuff and then doing a backup to Git, I guess.
I think they do sync it back to Git, but I hear you're just using it as your storage. Which
it is just it's basically just a
S3,
backup storage.
S3. Maybe that's okay.
Well, you can do it, and that's part of why the principles are written as they are. It actually, like, you don't need Git for it to be GitOps, but the GitOps operational model needs somewhere that is immutable and versioned, and you want your desired state to be there, and from there, that's the source of truth, and the source of truth is what's read and made sure that this is the reality. So as soon as you have like the place that are using the source of truth writing back to and changing stuff back and forward, it's just like I said, you're just storing your data somewhere else, so you can easily put up clusters again, I guess. So at that point, it's not GitOps, it's something new.
Okay.
And I can just say configuration as data. So
yeah, they use a different term. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to read this more closely myself now too after this call. Evaluate. I want to be conscious of this. Thank you. I mean, this is a good conversation about GitOps. And potential follow-on paper could be about the styles of automation within a like I kind of think within each of these categories there could be a follow-on, and going back to what we were saying earlier about interacting with the projects, that could be a part of it. Like we take Argo, Flux, KPT, and Terraform, and just discuss the paradigms for delivery automation or deployment automation, whatever you want to call them.
It's still a platform, even though it's just like static Terraform files somewhere that's run through a pipeline. It's still like a part of a platform. If you can update that and interact with that somehow, that's still a platform.
Yeah.
So there are many ways to do automation that is as right as the next one. Like there's no one way to do anything. But I think, like I said, the reason why something like GitOps is now seen as kind of like a golden standard for this is that you don't have to think about the deployment part. You just need to put your stuff somewhere, and then everything just happens. And with stuff like the TF controller that we are using, we can do that. We can have GitOps with Terraform, which in itself you can't really do. So.
It sounds to
Okay,
me
so-
like you're almost arguing that or explaining that your API for platform interfaces. We were having a big conversation last week around platform interfaces versus the delivery of capabilities, and like, are operators an example of a platform interface, or are they an example of a like ability to provide resources, which is you need everything. They're just different, capabilities or whatever. And we kind of settled on that, like, operators is a good example of, it's a way to deliver a capability, but like, it's not an interface in and of itself, right? But what I'm hearing you say is that your interface is GitOps. Is that right? Like, am I hearing you correctly that like your users, when requesting something, would use like a Git repository? Because the reason I'm asking is because that was another question that came up last week, is like, where would Git go on this diagram possibly? Should it go on the diagram? If it should, where should it go? And I wonder if that is in some ways an API to, in the API box for platform interfaces or whatever.
I would, and it's kind of hard to like pinpoint something like an operator or even controllers to one capability or the other, because yes, in my case, GitOps is the way that we are interacting with the platform, which means that you're putting your manifest there, and then it's a controller that picks up that and makes that happen. So the actual interaction with the platform itself is through, automatic software agents, just to call it something besides controller or operators. And if we are, for instance, like a good example would be like Cert Manager. Like that is something that people would interact with through YAML, but it is an automatic process around it. So they are ordering certificates through Cert Manager. Right? We haven't extracted that to a layer where you go in, like hook up like a thing and in Portal, and then you get a certificate. We can do that in the end, but the idea is to just leave as be. When you're doing ingress, you do your annotations, and that's how you interact with Cert Manager.
But is that an API then, or the implementation of the API? Like if I'm using an application, if it's backed by REST or by GraphQL, as a user, I don't see that. So my API is maybe the form that I have on my web page, or in Backstage is the template I filled in to start my golden path. And perhaps then in the backend, I have a Git push that triggers the GitOps model. But like, do we consider Git or GitOps an API or the operational model then to implement the API or to provide the capabilities that we ask through the API?
I would say not, because for me, what defines an API is that it's actually something that can easily be triggered from someone in a very specific manner. When you are doing GitOps, you are just, you're storing your configuration in Git, and that triggers an entire process that happens. There's no interaction through that form. Like, you can't go in there and get info out. You can't go in there and do small changes. You have to have a new state declared in your Git repository. I wouldn't consider GitOps to be anything like an API, unless you are actually, again, putting something in front of GitOps that are doing these type of tasks for you, the interaction part.
Interesting. I always consider GitOps just a different way of shepherding the request to the API server. It's just a pull model instead of, or event-driven model instead of a push. I mean, I guess
But-
you could, like, it's the exact shape of those APIs. Obviously, it's not defined, but I didn't see so much of a difference between just API calls.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Like, if you consider going into a Git repository and looking at files and reading them, and then that's how you get your information out, and then, it would be the same as you would with an API. And if you have some sort of system that can read those manifests from Git on the other end and then extract information from that, then yes, you could kind of like say that this is sort of like an API. But the definition for me for API is that it's an element where not only users but also computers can go in and say, this is the thing that we want to do against your system. And again, that's an abstraction layer. You don't say, I put in kind this, etc., etc., etc. That, that's not declaratively enough from like an interaction point of view for it to become an API for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I totally agree. So I guess we're all on the same page on that. Like, GitOps probably is one of the most popular way we used and we try to use, but like from the API point of view, and in this document, we don't enforce it or say that that's the API, or even Git, because I could check the Git repository, but that's not the real truth, right? Like, if I want to know if my application is running, Git doesn't know that. The status is in the cluster. So
yes,
so-
but that is kind of like the crown thing then, because as soon as you do other things than what kind of like the GitOps operation model says, then you actually can't trust what's happening in Git.
That's really, like the post-deployment observability is not really accounted for with the GitOps one. That's an interesting point. You need
So you need to be able to get some information from the cluster, but preferably whatever you're storing in Git is what actually is the current state, which is, again, like I said, that's why, for instance, I wouldn't call the what was called KPT, I wouldn't call that GitOps, because as soon as you start having interactions back and forth between different sources back to Git, it's not actually something you can look at and say, this is what the desired state is. This is just a state. Like, who knows what's going on in the cluster at that point?
Yeah, what would be kind of cool is if, we'll talk to the GitHub PMs, but like if they relay the application state back like a status field in the repo, like, okay, here's the desired state. Now there's a status. Here's the actual current state. Like, it doesn't come all the way back to Git right now.
Introducing GitOps to a few organizations, it was like prying from the cold dead hands of developers the ability to know that something worked based on their deployment pipeline. Like, if their deployment pipeline went green and somebody was like, oh, the most recent commit broke something, they'd be like, no, it didn't. Green pipeline. And so in multiple cases, I've had to introduce a validation at the end of a pipeline that just like checks for the state to be healthy for X amount of time, and then it
Mhm.
times out and says it's not healthy, and it's not the perfect thing, and it's really just trying to give feedback back to the devs of like,
The smoke test.
did you ever manage to get this state applied using the GitOps delivery or not? And if it did at least once, then like you get a green pipeline. If it didn't within whatever the timeout is, reasonable timeout is, then you get a red pipeline, and like you should investigate further. But I feel like
But
that breaks the GitOps model, but it was necessary for.
Not necessarily, because for instance, if you're again tool specific, but for, Flux have have the notification controller, so you can set that up to whenever something happens, reconcilers happen, it'll actually spew out that information into Slack or Teams or Discord, whatever whatever you do your work. And at the same time, like giving observability tools to developers doesn't necessarily break the operational model. So giving them a place to actually check that stuff is working isn't necessarily a bad thing. You could potentially do webhook interaction. So when Git does stuff, you can report back, for instance, like
like GitHub's
request.
check marks and X's and checks
Yeah.
in general. I was thinking about that. Like they almost have taken this idea already. Like automation to them was to get to the check mark. I feel like in GitHub, it's not about
Yes.
a pipeline. It's about, was your commit good?
Yes.
And that's, so they do kind of in the end get the check mark back. Yeah, this is an interesting point. I think that, I don't know, this came up in another thing that I was thinking about internally recently, where people were concerned about building and deploying, but not observing. And so, yeah, thanks.
But Argo has a UI for this, so you can look at your deployment there. Flux
Yeah.
doesn't per
That's
se,
example.
but
Perfect.
Flux are also doing a UI perspective, and there's other tools to look at your deployments, from afar. The thing is just a developer shouldn't be able to just jump into a cluster with admin access and do kubectl apply. Like that's the idea. Like, and it solves so many things when it comes to secret management. It solves so many things about like giving access to certain aspects of the platform. It solves so many things around that. But that doesn't mean that people aren't supposed to be able to look at the deployment to see that it works. It's not like you're deploying it blind and then, all right, cool, let's hope it works and just move on with your life. But the deployment part of it should just be out of everyone's hand.
Okay, there's something there about verification. I'll make sure that we're capturing that at least in like a line or something, verifying, a deployment or something. Okay, we're at 11 o'clock. I had left this pretty open, so thanks for the deep dive into GitOps. Like I said at the beginning, I'm work on getting the sections in. Feel free to comment on the issue, the doc, whatever it is, and yeah, we'll continue conversation offline. Oh, in 2 weeks, I think we should cancel it. I can't guarantee I'll be available. It's like Christmas or something the day after.
Yeah.
I won't be available. So let's just cancel that and we'll meet again beginning of January.
Yeah, I have 2 days and then I'm off. No,
Nice.
not gonna work.
Yeah.
I
Same
think-
here. Getting close.
Yeah, same. Josh, I think your goal was to get this to, I don't know what the bar was, but you were trying to get this into Git, and I'm not sure why it can't go into Git yet, what you're still holding off on. And I'm sorry I was late, so this may have been something you already shared. Is there anything that you are asking for help on to get over that barrier?
I will. I put in the notes here, and I did open. I commented on the original issue this morning. The next things, which is basically just a copy. Here, I'll send you this note. I'll paste it in here. Basically, just to copy some of the existing papers structures, which basically seem to break it down into like a few sections, and then have some sort of automation that merges it together, maybe publishes a PDF. So I want to just figure out the framework for that.
Okay.
Get that as a PR, and then put these sections in as PRs inside of it.
I seem to remember Thomas talking about the operator white paper, and that there's someone in the CNCF who pulls down the information and creates that PDF, like that official looking one. Not sure if it's like a fully automated thing or not, but someone.
So that's my
else
that's the
needs
next step. If you want to help with that, Abby, I could use some help. Like if you want to help me figure out how to create the framework.
I feel like you've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and like if it's a matter of figuring some stuff out, I won't take any action without you because I know there's a lot of moving parts right now. But feel free to ping me in Slack, and if I can do something
Yeah,
and not
okay.
stomp on your toes, I'm more than happy to help out. I've got a bit of time, so.
Same
Alright,
for
yeah,
me. I
let's-
have some time, so feel free to ping me if I can help in any way. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, yeah, I basically am looking to create a proposal, influenced by these existing papers or any other, specs that people put on GitHub and auto-generate. Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to, kind of research these and put the framework in, that's a PR for, section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4 with titles, and here's the merged document. Yeah, I'll start a thread with you in the background and we could talk about it.
Perfect.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Happy
All right.
holidays if I don't see you.
Happy
Thank you and
holidays.
happy
Yeah.
holidays. Bye.
Bye.
See you online. Peace.